the newest episode. So today we're going to be talking about a very key component of getting your home sold here in New York, right? When buyers walk into a home, they form an opinion almost instantly. And I've seen it time and time again, right? It's not after they've seen, the bedrooms, not after they check the backyard, not when they've seen the basement or the attic or any of that stuff. It's usually within the first 30 seconds. And what's interesting is that most homeowners believe that buyers are strictly evaluating things like the square footage, renovations, upgrades first. But in reality, buyers are responding to something that's much more subtle, you know? They're responding to how they're responding to how the home feels, you know? I've always said that real estate is about numbers, but it's more than just numbers. It's about people, and that always involves emotions, especially when you're talking about purchasing a home. You remember when you bought your home, it was a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice to be able to get to that point, right? So they're responding to this subtlety of how a home feels. So today I want to break that down into what buyers are actually noticing in those first 30 seconds. And I'm doing this because it's important to understand that this can actually make a huge difference if you're planning on selling your home. It's You got to strategize within those first 30 seconds, right? So the first thing to understand is that buying a home is not purely a logical decision. You and I both know, right? It's At the end of the day, emotion plays a very large role. So we can say that it's emotional. Even the most analytical buyers, the ones who come in with spreadsheets and calculations and protractors and rulers, they're still influenced by the emotional reaction that they have when they first walk through the door. It happens quickly. That reaction happens quickly, within seconds. Buyers start asking themselves and sometimes whispering to each other, does this feel like a place that I can live? Is it going to be, does it feel comfortable? As simple as that, right? Does this feel like home? That's the key question, right? And once that emotional reaction forms, it actually influences how they evaluate everything else in the home, right? If the feeling is positive, buyers start looking for, those reasons to justify buying the home. On the flip side, if the feeling is negative, they're going to start looking for reasons a little more closely for ways to rule it out completely. So this is how critical this beginning of showing a home is, right? So one of the first things that buyers notice, often, you know, subconsciously, is going to be the lighting. You know, a bright, well-lit home feels more welcoming and more spacious. Go ahead and try it yourself. Go into a home, go walk into your own home when the lights are dimmer or when they're off versus when they're bright. And go in with a perspective of, I wonder how my home looks like, from a buyer's perspective. And it's going to feel, a well-lit home feels more welcoming, it feels more spacious, and a darker aesthetic or darker home is going to, it's going to, even if it's the same exact size as that well-lit home, it's going to feel smaller and it's going to feel less inviting. Sometimes something as simple as opening the blinds, turning on lights, or even replacing some of those, dim light bulbs that you haven't changed in forever can really dramatically change how the home's going to feel when someone walks in, especially for the very first time, right? And it's not about making the home look artificial. No, that's not what we're aiming for. It's about allowing the buyers to see the space clearly and comfortably so that they can imagine themselves living there. Now, this one's key, and I've seen it impact sales in the past. Another thing that buyers notice immediately is smell. And this is one of the most overlooked factors when preparing a home for showings, right? Smell is incredibly powerful because it triggers memory and emotion instantly. So if a buyer walks into a home and they're smelling something that's unpleasant to them, pets, heavy cooking odors, mildew, that's going to stick with them. It's going to be at least in the back of their head if it's faint or if it's not overwhelming. But if it's overpowering, sometimes buyers turn right back around, you know. Even if the home itself is beautiful, on the other hand, a neutral, fresh smelling home creates a much better first impression. And when I'm talking about this includes those open houses that we're hosting. It doesn't need to smell like sunshine and rainbows, I say, but it doesn't have to smell like candies or candles or air fresheners. In fact, too much fragrance can also make buyers suspicious and sometimes uncomfortable, right? What you really want is clean and neutral. That's what we're aiming for here. That more of the cleanly and neutral kind of smell would be the best bet to go, right? The next thing the buyers notice quickly, and I mean quickly, is how the space feels in terms of layout and in terms of openness, right? And one thing that plays a big role here is clutter, you know. And clutter is just things that are out, there's just too many items out at once. The items are not where they belong. Many of these things can be put in closets. It could be as simple as a bunch of pet toys or kids' toys, or the bean bag that you could put in another room so that the living room looks more spacious. A lot of things on top of counters or on top of tables or bags all over the place. You want to make sure that you're limiting that, right? And even furniture. When a room has too much furniture or too many of these personal items, buyers start focusing on the objects instead of the space themselves, instead of the space itself, which takes away from your home because your home is trying to, we're trying to show your home in the best light. And when the buyers are focused on things versus the actual space, they're not noticing what really is inviting about your home, what the key benefits are from purchasing your home, right? How it's going to feel living there. They're just going to be looking at all these things and being distracted. We don't want that distraction. When a home feels open and organized, now buyers are picturing their own life there. Imagine little Sally and Susie in the corner playing or with their pets or whatnot. They start imagining their own furniture, their own morning routines. Oh, this is where I can put my lazy boy, drink my cup of coffee, their own future. And that shift in perspective is incredibly important because that perspective, allowing them to live there in their own minds, that's evoking emotion, right? When they start picturing themselves in the home, you can say that they're becoming emotionally invested. And we need that when you're selling your home, right? Now, another subtlety of cleanliness in the home is it's crazy, but it's in the back of your mind as a buyer. When they pick up on that, it's a detail that buyers pick up on almost immediately, right? They see that there's, that things are clean, that they're properly taken care of. It sends a signal when things are clean, when the home is clean, when it's organized. It it tells the buyer a story. It's telling the buyer that the property has likely been well cared for. And why is that important? Because buying a home is an investment, right? It's a financial investment, it's an emotional investment, there's a lot of sacrifice involved. So when they're looking at a house and they feel that it's been cared for, now they can feel more comfortable moving forward in the process and understanding that everything is going to be in working order after an inspection. Everything is in its correct place, and that they're making the right choice. They're making the right investment, right? If they walk in and notice dust, stains, general neglect, now we're starting to create uncertainty. And that's something that is dangerous when it comes to real estate, right? When when uncertainty sinks in for buyers, you know, when they start wondering what else might be wrong, now they're becoming a little tighter. They're becoming more cautious. Sometimes even small things like freshly cleaned floors or organized countertops can truly change that perception entirely. So, so far we've been focusing on really small things that play a really big role when it comes to that first 30 seconds. Then think about it. If you walk into the home and let's say you're walking into the foyer, shoes all over the place, muddy clothes, this, that, and the other, it's not feeling inviting. It's not feeling like home, right? And these 30 seconds can be, the initial 30 seconds and then 30 seconds looking into a room, or you could walk from the front of your home to the kitchen within 30 seconds. You know what I'm saying? So keep this in mind. It's just, and this is per showing, right? You're thinking about this when you first list the home and then as showings are happening throughout the sale of, the process of selling your home. All these details, they come together, and the details as they, kind of stack onto each other, they're adding to the overall feeling of the home. And that feeling forms extremely quickly. I say 30 seconds, but it could be even quicker than that. You know, it's why sometimes buyers walk into a property and say, I don't know why, but this one just feels right. This is the one. It's kind of like when you're going out on that date and you feel that vibe and this is going to be the one. I'm romanticizing it, but it happens more than you think. And other times they're going to say it's nice, but something feels off, and it might not be both parties. If there's multiple parties, it might just be one person that notices that. But once one has an uncertain feeling, that's already steering everything in the wrong direction, right? So the emotional reaction influences everything that follows. you know it's going to influence how long they stay, how they talk about the home afterward, what they're going to be looking for throughout the journey of going through the home, right? They're going to be a little more nitpicky if they are already cautious at the beginning. And then at the end of the day, all of these things build up to ultimately whether they're going to make an offer and then what type of offer is that going to be, right? The good news is that a lot of these things they're simple to improve. You don't necessarily need major renovations or expensive upgrades at the end of the day. Often it's about understanding how they experience the home when they first walk in. It really can be that simple. Real estate is not always a complicated, science. There's a lot of, inner workings and things behind the scenes. But when it comes to the psychology of it, just make sure that your home is being portrayed in the best light possible. It just makes sense. you know and by making a few strategic adjustments so that that first impression is actually working in your favor, I mean, it just makes sense. You want as much money for the sale of your home as possible, right? All the all the hard work, all the sacrifice that you made in getting the home. The best way you can ensure that is by making sure that your home is portrayed in the best light. That first impression, man, it's paramount. It's something that has made deals and is stuff that has prevented deals from happening many times in my career, whether I was working for the seller, right? Because as an agent, you can tell kind of that when you're showing and you see that initial look of kind of like a disappointment or an unease versus, it's kind of like a kid just showing up at Disneyland. There's that excitement, there's that vibrance, and we want to evoke more of that. So if you're thinking about selling your home, whether it's, soon or even, a year or two down the road, these are the types of things that we walk through when we talk about getting your home prepared for market. Whenever we're talking about preparing the home for market, these subtle things are going to be some of the things that we focus on top of the marketing that's online. But we also want to make sure that the little details are taken care of so they don't take away from the whole vision, right? The goal is simple at the end of the day. You create the strongest possible first impression. And if you ever want clarity on what your home could realistically sell for in today's market, whether, like I said, if you're thinking now or in the future, we can look at the numbers now and then again revisit them in the future. It's not an obligation after that meeting, right? So we can talk about several things when we meet, right? We can talk about, we can make it a little more clear on what you could realistically get, like I said, what the realistic price, what you can expect, what the walkaway money would be, what's going to be in your pocket at the end of the day, because that's supremely important. And then we'll also discuss how you can best prepare your home to list it, right? It's not necessarily a question of getting it done right now, but at least you can have some time. Maybe you're thinking about the next 6 months. Well, that gives you 6 months where a couple of days a week you can dedicate to fixing or to focusing on these small details that make such a big difference when it comes to selling your home, you know? So if you like that information or you happen to know anybody that might benefit from this info, please feel free to reach out to them. And of course, you can reach out to us regarding our Getting Your Home Ready for Sale guide that we have. It's not called that, but that's the gist of it. So you can focus on the things that will really make the biggest difference instead of worrying, wondering, searching all over the place about what's going to make things happen for you in this market and in New York. Whether we're talking about Queens, Brooklyn, Long Island, the rest of the boroughs, surrounding areas. We can get you on a plan. We can get you started on that. So if you know someone who owns a home and they might be thinking about it, please feel free to share my info with them. Send this to them and, we can connect. At the very least, they'll be educated as well and they'll know what they can be expecting, right? So thanks again for listening and for watching and for the attention that you've given me. And I look forward to catching you on the next one. Talk to you guys later. Oh, and P.S. If you guys want more information or if you'd like a confidential meeting, 15 minutes, we can talk. You can reach out to me at 917-982-8899. Again, 917-982-8899. And two ways that you can find out more about me. You can go on YouTube, type in Sell Your Queen's Home, or you can go on Instagram, type in David Garcia KW, and you'll see a bunch of tips, a lot of different videos, and you can see what I'm up to today. So looking forward to connect, and we'll talk soon. Take care, guys.